The heavy fog rolled across Exmoor, a ghostly blanket swallowing the moors and valleys until every shape blurred into the gray nothingness. It was a night when familiar landmarks became foreign shadows, and every sound took on an eerie echo, drifting mysteriously through the haze. In a small, secluded cottage on the edge of the moor, Tom Fletcher sat by the flickering fireplace, nursing a cup of steaming tea. The window panes rattled gently with the wind's insistence as the old clock on the mantel struck 11:30 with a muffled chime. Tom barely noticed. His mind was elsewhere, drifting in memories far away from this quiet isolation. At 45, Tom had the weathered look of a man accustomed to hardship. Deep lines traced his face, reminders of countless rescues on storm-tossed seas during his years with the Coast Guard. That chapter of his life had ended abruptly 2 years ago, pushing him into solitude, away from the noise, the chaos, the reminders of tragedies he'd witnessed, and those he'd failed to save. He had thought Exmoor would be a sanctuary, a place quiet enough to forget. Yet even now, memories still haunted him, whispered through the wind and the rolling mist. Tom was startled from his reverie by a sudden noise, a faint rustling outside his door, almost imperceptible yet oddly persistent. Setting down his tea, he stood, moving cautiously toward the door, heart beating faster as he strained to listen through the gentle creaking of the old cottage. Then came a soft, yet unmistakable sound, a gentle whinny, high-pitched and fragile, floating softly through the night. Tom hesitated for just a moment, then reached for the door latch. The cold bit into his skin as the door swung open, fog pouring inside like liquid silk. The night air was sharp with chill and carried a subtle, earthy scent of damp grass. Standing in the dim illumination from the cottage was a silhouette, proud yet weary. An Exmoor pony, her dark eyes catching the faint glow from Tom's porch lamp. Her coarse mane was damp with moisture, her breathing heavy, her eyes filled with an urgency Tom instantly felt deep within himself. "Moor," Tom whispered, recognizing the mare he'd seen occasionally wandering the edges of his land. The wild Exmoor ponies often avoided human contact, their presence elusive yet comforting, another gentle heartbeat of this isolated land. But tonight Moor stood close, brave and vulnerable, eyes pleading silently. At her feet, obscured partially by shadows in the tall grasses, lay a tiny form, a foal, small and shivering violently. It barely moved, breathing shallow and rapid. Tom felt his heart twist painfully as he knelt beside the tiny creature, gently brushing his hand across its fragile frame. The foal flinched weakly, but didn't pull away, too exhausted and weak to protest. Moor stepped back slightly, still vigilant, trusting Tom in this moment of desperate need. Tom gently scooped the foal into his arms, surprised at its lightness, its frailty. "Come inside," he murmured quietly, as much to himself as to the animals. Moor stayed back, watching silently as Tom stepped inside, carrying her trembling offspring into the warmth. Inside the cottage, Tom laid the foal carefully near the fire, quickly gathering blankets to wrap around the tiny, shivering creature. He rubbed it gently, trying desperately to impart warmth through his touch. Its heartbeat fluttered beneath his palm, weak but alive. He glanced outside the window, where Moor stood watching him intently, the mare's stance strong yet filled with maternal anxiety. The pony's bravery stirred something buried deep within Tom, a connection to something he had believed lost forever. Courage, compassion, and purpose. The foal stirred slightly, emitting a feeble whimper. Tom rose, suddenly aware of how unprepared he was for this responsibility. He paced briefly, anxiety rising. It had been a long time since he had dealt with a life depending upon his actions. His mind flashed back to stormy seas, rescue boats, lives hanging by mere threads of fate, his hands steadying ropes and lifelines. For so long, he had shunned those memories, believing the pain too great. Yet now, those memories returned as strength rather than burden. His hands trembled lightly as he reached for the phone, dialing a number he had never expected to call again. His breathing felt tight in his chest as he heard the ring, waiting for an answer that seemed an eternity coming. "Rachel Evans speaking?" came a calm, clear voice, professional even at this late hour. "Rachel, it's Tom Fletcher," he began quietly, the words tumbling out before doubt could silence him. "I need your help. I wouldn't call if it wasn't urgent. There's a foal here, a wild Exmoor pony. It's very weak, and I don't know what else to do." A short pause hung heavy between them before Rachel replied confidently, her voice steadying his nerves. "I'm coming right over, Tom. Keep the foal warm, and try to keep it calm." Tom nodded instinctively, the receiver still pressed tightly to his ear. "Thank you, Rachel," he murmured softly, relief seeping through his voice as he hung up. Returning to the foal, he knelt again, gently soothing the creature with murmured reassurances. Outside, Moor shifted uneasily but stayed close, her silhouette blending with the shifting fog. Tom's pulse calmed as the moments stretched. The foal's breathing steadied marginally, the faintest sign of improvement stirring hope within him. He ran his fingers gently through the tiny mane, quietly choosing a name. "I'll call you Heather," he whispered softly, the word resonating like a quiet promise. "You're going to make it, Heather. You're stronger than you think." Minutes later, headlights pierced the dense fog, illuminating Moor briefly before she slipped into shadows, watching protectively from a distance. Rachel emerged from her car swiftly, medical supplies in hand, her determined footsteps reassuringly firm against the gravel path. Tom opened the door wide, the cool night air rushing inward, carrying with it a sense of renewal, a subtle promise of redemption. Rachel met his eyes briefly, recognizing the gravity of this moment. "Let's get to work," she said, her voice firm yet gentle, immediately kneeling by the foal to assess her condition. Tom watched quietly, heart heavy with a responsibility he was finally ready to embrace. Outside, Moor waited silently, her breath misting softly in the cold air, watching the cottage door closely, a guardian shadow, a mother placing trust in unlikely hands. For Tom Fletcher, isolated by choice yet bound now to this unexpected visitor, the night had revealed something profound. Sometimes salvation arrives quietly, wrapped in shadows and mist, asking nothing but courage and kindness in return. Tom paced anxiously near the fireplace, his eyes constantly flickering back to Heather, who lay nestled beneath a thick blanket by the hearth. The foal's frail frame trembled slightly, her breathing shallow yet steadier than before. Outside, the mist continued swirling, shaping strange shadows along the window panes. Glancing through the fog-stained window, Tom caught the dim silhouette of Moor standing vigilantly, eyes fixed toward the small cottage, patiently waiting, her presence oddly comforting. Drawing a deep breath, he turned toward the window, softly murmuring as if she could hear him through the glass. "Don't worry, Moor. We'll get through this." The faint sound of gravel crunching beneath tires drew Tom's attention sharply back to reality. He moved swiftly to the door, his heartbeat quickening with relief as he saw Rachel Evans's familiar Land Rover pulling into the driveway. Rachel stepped out of the vehicle swiftly, a medical bag in hand, her brisk movements professional and reassuring. "Tom!" she called, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. "How is she?" He opened the door wide to welcome her in, a mixture of anxiety and gratitude evident on his weary face. "Stable for now, I think, but she's weak. She needs your expertise, Rachel." Rachel nodded once, determination bright in her eyes. Entering the cottage quickly, she immediately knelt beside the small form of Heather, laying down her supplies with practiced efficiency. Her movements were deft, clinical, yet unmistakably gentle. "She's hypothermic," Rachel murmured thoughtfully after a quick examination, laying her hand on the foal's side. "But her heartbeat is steady, sluggish, but steady. That's a good sign. She's a fighter, Tom." Tom released a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding, hope blooming gently within him. Rachel began quickly arranging supplies, sterile gauze, IV fluids, warming pads, her hands moving swiftly yet methodically. "Bring me warm water and more blankets, please," she instructed gently, her focus unwavering. "We must keep her warm and hydrated." Without hesitation, Tom rushed toward the kitchenette, heating water quickly and grabbing additional blankets from an old cedar chest. He felt the urgency of the moment keenly, his hands trembling slightly as he returned to Rachel's side. "Here you go," he said quietly, laying out the blankets and setting down the basin of warm water. "Thank you," Rachel said softly, her eyes briefly meeting his with warm reassurance. "We'll do everything we can." As Rachel carefully inserted the IV needle into Heather's tiny foreleg, Tom sat close by, watching her with quiet admiration. Rachel had always been a calm presence, her professional demeanor soothing yet firm, capable of handling any crisis with gentle efficiency. In her presence, he felt steadied, as if part of the heavy burden had lifted from his shoulders. "You know, Rachel," Tom began hesitantly, his voice low, filled with introspection, "it feels strange to be doing something like this again. I spent so long hiding from everything, from everyone." Rachel glanced up momentarily, compassion softening her eyes. "You always had a big heart, Tom. That's something you can't hide forever. I think Heather might have sensed that." Tom managed a small smile, feeling a warmth spread slowly through his chest. They both turned their attention back to Heather, whose tiny frame stirred faintly beneath Rachel's careful ministrations. Her breathing gradually steadied, slow but even, the warming blankets and fluids working their quiet magic. Rachel gently placed her hand on Heather's flank, speaking softly to her, words murmured like a lullaby. "You're doing great, little one. You're strong. You'll be running across Exmoor again before you know it." Outside, Moor moved closer to the window, her nose nearly pressing against the frosted glass, drawn by the quiet voices and the gentle lamplight. Tom noticed her movement and felt an inexplicable urge to reassure her too. He rose slowly and stepped outside into the chilly air, approaching cautiously, palms open in a gentle gesture. "Hey, Moor," he whispered soothingly, his breath visible in the misty air. The mare regarded him steadily, ears flicking in his direction, muscles tense yet receptive. "Your baby's fighting hard. She'll make it through, I promise." Moor took a cautious step toward him, her gaze fixed firmly on his eyes, as if seeking confirmation of his words. Tom held perfectly still, heart pounding softly as he watched her carefully edge closer, finally close enough to lightly brush her velvety muzzle against his outstretched hand. In that tender moment, Tom felt an unexpected bond forming, a connection forged in mutual vulnerability and quiet courage. His pulse calmed, feeling Moor's gentle warmth beneath his fingertips, understanding silently passing between them. Back inside, Rachel was carefully monitoring Heather's vital signs, satisfied with the small yet steady improvements. Hearing Tom re-enter, she looked up and smiled softly, recognizing the significance of what had just occurred outside. "She trusts you, Tom," Rachel murmured warmly. "That's not common for wild Exmoor ponies. They usually avoid humans entirely." Tom nodded, emotion thickening his voice. "Maybe she sensed something I'd forgotten I had in me." Rachel's eyes softened further. "Sometimes, animals see clearer than we do. Perhaps Heather and Moor found exactly who they needed when they needed him." The cottage grew quiet once more, filled only with the gentle sounds of Heather's even breathing and the soft crackle of the fire. The hours slipped by unnoticed, filled with quiet tasks and soft conversation. Rachel stayed steadfastly by Heather's side, calmly guiding Tom through small tasks, teaching him what to watch for, and reassuring him whenever uncertainty clouded his expression. As dawn's pale fingers stretched slowly across the horizon, Heather's small form stirred, eyes blinking sleepily open, wide and curious, taking in her surroundings. Rachel gently stroked the foal's neck, whispering encouragement. "She's responding well," Rachel said softly, genuine relief filling her voice. "Your quick actions made all the difference, Tom. You saved her life." Tom felt his throat tighten, overwhelmed by a profound sense of relief and gratitude. Looking down at Heather, who was now staring back at him, eyes clear and trusting, he knew something within him had shifted forever. His solitude had been punctured, the barriers he'd built crumbling quietly, replaced by something richer, warmer, hope. "Thank you, Rachel," he said sincerely, meeting her gentle gaze, appreciation deep and heartfelt. "For everything." Rachel smiled warmly, packing her supplies quietly. "You did the hardest part already, opening the door and letting them in." Outside, Moor whinnied softly, her voice gentle in the fading fog, the sound drifting like a quiet promise across the hills of Exmoor. Tom felt it settle deep within his heart, realizing this night had irrevocably changed the quiet isolation he'd sought. Heather, Moor, and Rachel, they had all found him in the shadows of Exmoor, quietly reminding him of life's enduring strength and simple courage. The cabin had gradually transformed from a stark refuge into something warmer, kinder, more alive than it had been for years. As evening crept slowly over Exmoor, painting the horizon with strokes of deepening indigo and dusky gold, Tom found himself quietly preparing the small cottage for another night with Heather. His movements were careful, tender, each action measured, purposeful, and carried out with a gentleness he had nearly forgotten he possessed. Heather lay curled comfortably near the crackling hearth, bundled in a cocoon of blankets Rachel had left behind. Her tiny chest rose and fell rhythmically now, her breathing significantly improved since the fraught hours of early morning. The firelight cast soft, dancing shadows across her small form, illuminating her chestnut coat and the delicate contours of her young frame. Occasionally, she stirred gently in her sleep, emitting faint, soft whimpers that pulled gently at Tom's heart. Stepping toward her, Tom knelt and carefully brushed her small forelock aside, studying the fragile face that had, in mere hours, irrevocably altered his existence. She responded instinctively, leaning slightly into his touch as he stroked her gently, speaking softly into the silence, words woven from deep within. "You'll be all right now, Heather," he whispered reassuringly, his voice warm and comforting. "We'll get you strong again, I promise." Outside, the soft rustle of hooves drew Tom's gaze to the window. Moor stood there, her dark shape partially obscured by the gathering dusk. She had maintained her quiet vigil, appearing intermittently throughout the day to watch over the cottage, occasionally pacing back and forth with measured caution, yet never straying far. Meeting her gaze through the glass, Tom felt a subtle yet profound connection, an understanding that crossed the barriers of language and species. They were both guardians now, he realized, partners in the gentle but demanding task of ensuring Heather's survival. A knock on the cottage door startled Tom gently from his contemplations. Rachel entered quietly, her face softly illuminated by the glow of the fire as she smiled warmly in greeting. She carried a large bag of fresh medical supplies, formula, and additional blankets. "How is our patient?" Rachel asked gently, approaching the hearth and kneeling beside Heather. Her careful fingers assessed the foal's vitals with practiced efficiency, her expression softening in approval. "She's much stronger already. Good job, Tom. She's lucky to have you." Tom smiled slightly, the praise warming something within him that had been dormant far too long. "She deserves a chance. After everything you said about these ponies, survivors, right?" Rachel glanced up, eyes brightening with the quiet passion that always entered her voice when she spoke about the creatures of Exmoor. "They truly are remarkable, Tom. They've endured for centuries. Heather carries that same strength within her. With your help, she's going to thrive." The confidence in Rachel's tone resonated deeply within Tom, reaffirming his decision to step away from solitude. He watched as Rachel carefully prepared a specialized milk formula, mixing powder with warm water and shaking the bottle methodically. "Come here." She beckoned gently, inviting Tom closer. "She needs to bond with you as well. Let's feed her together." Tom knelt carefully by Heather's side, heart thudding lightly as Rachel guided the small bottle toward the foal's muzzle. Heather's nostrils flared curiously as the scent of warm milk reached her, and she hesitated only briefly before suckling tentatively, then more vigorously. The rhythm of her feeding, combined with the soft crackle of firewood and Rachel's quiet instructions, wove a calm and comforting pattern through the room. For Tom, each moment brought a quiet healing, mending fragmented parts of his spirit long forgotten. While Heather drank, Rachel spoke softly, her voice low and gentle. "Do you know why Exmoor ponies have survived so long, Tom?" He shook his head, eyes still fixed on the foal, feeling oddly peaceful. "No. Tell me." "They've adapted to this harsh land by relying on community, strength, and intelligence. Each pony helps the other. A mare won't abandon her foal easily, and the herd protects its members fiercely. They teach us something valuable, resilience through community." Tom glanced up, thoughtful, considering her words carefully. "Maybe humans can learn from them after all." Rachel smiled gently. "Exactly. They remind us that we're stronger together, even if we've forgotten." Heather finished her bottle slowly, her eyelids growing heavier with each swallow. Rachel carefully lifted her small head, cradling it gently, and set the bottle aside. Heather's tiny muzzle nestled softly into Tom's palm, the warmth of her breath soft against his skin. "You see?" Rachel whispered encouragingly. "She trusts you, Tom." His throat tightened slightly, emotion swelling unexpectedly. Trust was something he'd denied himself for too long, yet here it was, freely offered by this fragile, resilient life. Later, after Rachel had departed, promising to return again in the morning, Tom sat quietly beside Heather, the fire now reduced to glowing embers. His thoughts drifted gently through memories, past moments he'd spent years avoiding, rescues at sea, lives saved and lost. friendships built and strained by hardships. Yet, amid the gentle breathing of the sleeping foal beside him, those memories no longer haunted him. Instead, they reminded him of who he truly was, someone capable of compassion, courage, and responsibility. Heather's quiet presence served as a beacon, guiding him back to himself. In the silence, Heather stirred slightly, eyes blinking open momentarily, wide and trusting. Tom smiled warmly, voice soft in the tranquil room. "Hey there, Heather. Did you have a good rest?" She regarded him quietly, contentment visible in her gaze, before nestling deeper into her blankets, breathing evenly once more. Tom reached out gently, adjusting her blankets carefully, ensuring warmth and comfort. Glancing once more outside the window, Tom saw Moor still standing quietly, watching over them both, her silent vigil unwavering beneath the pale moonlight. He realized then, clearly and profoundly, that Heather's unexpected arrival had become a catalyst for his own quiet transformation. Exmoor's stark, lonely beauty had sheltered him for years, patiently waiting for the moment when solitude would yield to something deeper, richer, and infinitely more rewarding. Tonight, beneath soft lamplight and the quiet watchfulness of Moor, Tom understood clearly the lesson Exmoor ponies had offered through the centuries. Strength lay not in isolation, but in connection, community, and courage. As sleep finally overtook him, Tom's heart was lighter than it had been in years, filled with newfound hope, quiet purpose, and a sense of belonging that wrapped gently around him like a comforting blanket, stitching together pieces he'd once thought irreparable. Heather had come to him wounded and fragile, yet somehow, in the quiet recovery beneath the soft glow of lamplight, she had begun healing him as well. Morning emerged slowly over Exmoor, the sun quietly burning away the remnants of fog that lingered stubbornly on the hillsides. Tom awoke to gentle, pale light filtering softly through the cottage windows, casting warm, golden patterns across the rough wooden floor. It took him a moment to remember everything from the night before, but the small, steady breathing of Heather quickly anchored him back to reality. Heather lay curled beside the hearth, awake now, her dark, bright eyes blinking softly at him with open curiosity. Tom smiled gently, feeling an unfamiliar tenderness swell within his chest. He reached slowly, cautiously, brushing the back of his hand against her warm, soft muzzle. The foal didn't flinch or pull away. Instead, she leaned into his touch instinctively, her trust evident. "Good morning, Heather," Tom whispered warmly, his voice filled with quiet gratitude. "Looks like you're feeling stronger today." Heather responded with a soft, gentle whinny, her tiny ears flicking forward. Tom chuckled softly, genuinely amused and touched. The cabin suddenly felt more alive, filled with subtle yet comforting companionship. After checking the dwindling fire and feeding Heather with the formula Rachel had carefully left behind, Tom stepped outside to breathe the fresh morning air. He inhaled deeply, savoring the sharp tang of dew and grass. Moor waited patiently, her stance calm yet attentive, just beyond the small fence that bordered his cottage yard. Their eyes met again, sharing quiet acknowledgement and mutual respect. "You can come closer, you know," Tom said softly, hoping the mare might sense his sincerity. Moor watched him cautiously, her dark, intelligent eyes considering his gentle invitation. Slowly, she took several tentative steps forward, cautiously closing the distance. Tom held his breath slightly, knowing how rare this moment was. A wild Exmoor pony willingly approaching a human was something deeply uncommon. Carefully, he extended his palm, steady and inviting, waiting patiently. Moor sniffed softly, her warm breath brushing gently against his skin. After a long, careful pause, she finally nudged her soft nose into his palm, breathing slowly and deeply, taking in his scent and his energy. Tom felt his heart expand, humbled and grateful for the quiet trust now shared. Days slipped by quickly, weaving together into a gentle rhythm of care, healing, and companionship. Heather gradually strengthened, her energy returning with each passing hour, while Tom diligently crafted a small, sturdy stable for her, using weathered timber salvaged from around his property. It was a simple task, yet it felt meaningful, a physical representation of his commitment and affection. Each evening, Moor would return from grazing on the open moors, standing vigil quietly by the cottage. Though she never came inside or ventured far from the perimeter, her constant presence was reassuring, a protective sentinel overseeing the well-being of her offspring. Rachel visited regularly, always arriving promptly, her visits becoming a source of quiet reassurance and companionship for Tom. They worked easily together, gently tending to Heather's nutritional and medical needs, sharing quiet conversation as they monitored her progress. One bright afternoon, Rachel watched thoughtfully as Heather, stronger now, took cautious, playful steps around the small yard, testing her wobbly legs. Tom observed carefully, ready to steady her at any sign of faltering, his eyes warm with pride and quiet joy. "She's growing quickly," Rachel remarked fondly, a note of genuine admiration in her voice. "You've done wonderfully, Tom. Heather couldn't have found a better caretaker." Tom smiled slightly, humbled by her praise. "Truth is, she's helped me just as much, maybe more. I didn't realize how isolated I'd become. Heather and Moor, they've reminded me what connection feels like." Rachel's eyes softened with understanding. "Animals have a way of doing that. They sense our needs, our struggles, sometimes better than we do ourselves." Tom nodded thoughtfully, watching Heather continue her playful exploration. "It's been a long time since I've allowed myself to feel responsible for anyone else. It's scary, but it's good. It feels right." Rachel smiled warmly, her presence quietly reassuring. "Life can be surprising like that. Sometimes it offers exactly what we need, exactly when we least expect it." Later that evening, after Rachel departed, Tom sat quietly beside Heather, brushing her coat gently beneath the fading daylight. Heather stood calmly, enjoying the soothing contact, leaning gently into Tom's hand as he moved methodically along her back. "You know," he murmured softly, more to himself than to the foal, "I used to save people. I pulled them from stormy seas, from wrecked boats, dangerous places. After a while, the ones I couldn't save started to overshadow the ones I could. The weight became too heavy, too painful. That's why I ran here to Exmoor to escape." Heather tilted her head slightly, regarding him calmly with intelligent eyes, her quiet presence somehow deeply comforting. "But you've reminded me that running isn't the answer. There's courage in facing things head-on, in embracing responsibility again." Tom continued quietly, gently stroking her mane. Outside, Moor quietly approached the fence, her shadow lengthening gracefully in the setting sun. She observed silently, ears twitching occasionally, attentive to the quiet conversation drifting through the still evening air. Tom glanced toward her, gratitude clear in his gaze. "You trusted me with your daughter, Moor, even when I wasn't sure I trusted myself. Thank you for giving me another chance." In response, Moor softly whinnied, her gentle voice echoing peacefully through the twilight. Tom felt warmth flood through him, an affirmation, a subtle acknowledgement of shared trust and renewed purpose. As evening darkened further, Tom secured Heather comfortably inside her new stable, ensuring she was warm and sheltered for the night. He lingered a moment, gently rubbing her nose affectionately. "Sleep well, little one," he whispered softly, eyes warm and protective. Heading inside the cottage, Tom glanced back once more. Moor remained quietly at the fence, watchful and serene beneath the moonlit sky. Their eyes met briefly, silent gratitude exchanged, an understanding passing softly between them. Inside, Tom settled beside the glowing embers of the hearth, comforted by the familiar quiet of the cottage. Yet now, the silence felt different, less solitary, more peaceful, filled with quiet companionship and gentle purpose. The shadows of isolation were slowly receding, replaced by the soft, reassuring presence of community and connection. In the gentle darkness, Tom's thoughts drifted warmly. Exmoor had sheltered him quietly, patiently waiting for the right moment to reintroduce him to himself, through Heather, through Moor, through Rachel. Each had entered his life gently yet powerfully, helping him reclaim parts of himself long neglected, forgotten beneath layers of guilt and grief. Tonight, beneath the expansive skies of Exmoor, under quiet stars and peaceful darkness, Tom felt a new resolve, a quiet promise forming deep within. He had been found, chosen by unexpected companions who had entrusted their fragile lives to his care. In return, Tom found the quiet courage to embrace responsibility once more, determined to never again turn away from the bonds of trust and compassion that now filled his once lonely heart. Sunrise spilled over Exmoor with a gentle warmth that promised a peaceful day. Heather stood outside the little cottage, her young frame catching the golden sunlight, her growing strength evident as she moved gracefully, testing out legs that now held more confidence and stability than ever. Tom watched her, pride evident in his quiet smile, sipping a steaming cup of coffee as he leaned comfortably against the rough wood of the fence. Nearby, Moor grazed quietly, a picture of serenity and maternal watchfulness. She had taken to lingering closer now, her wariness slowly replaced with an implicit trust. Tom marveled silently at the bond they'd formed, the quiet companionship he had never imagined he'd welcome again. But that tranquil morning suddenly shattered at the harsh sound of a car engine roaring closer, tires crunching aggressively against gravel. Heather jumped nervously, quickly sidling nearer to Moor, whose ears flattened instinctively, alert and protective. Tom straightened, setting his mug down swiftly on the fence post, tension coiling sharply in his chest. A sleek black sedan skidded abruptly to a halt, sending a shower of gravel scattering across the ground. The driver's side door swung open aggressively, and Mr. Henry Blackwell emerged. Blackwell owned much of the neighboring land, a stern, perpetually irritated man in his early 60s whose demeanor was as hard-edged as his well-tailored suits. "Fletcher!" Mr. Blackwell barked sharply, marching toward Tom with purposeful, furious strides. His eyes flashed with barely contained anger, his face reddening beneath his thinning silver hair. "We need to talk. Now!" Tom stood his ground calmly, shielding Heather subtly from Blackwell's approach. "What's the issue, Henry?" he asked steadily, refusing to match the older man's aggression. Mr. Blackwell jabbed an accusing finger toward Heather and Moor. "These wild animals of yours, they've been causing trouble, trampling my fences, scaring my sheep. I'm done tolerating it. You've got no right harboring wild creatures here." Tom took a breath, holding his temper carefully in check. "Heather and Moor haven't harmed anyone or anything, Henry. They've been right here with me. You're mistaken. Blackwell's nostrils flared angrily, his voice rising. Don't patronize me, Fletcher. I have sheep scattering left and right, fencing broken. You might think you're some kind of rescuer, but you're nothing but a nuisance. Either you control these animals, or I'll have the authorities remove them. The noise and tension had Heather shifting nervously behind Tom, while Moor positioned herself protectively between Blackwell and the foal, eyes narrowed defensively. Tom spoke firmly, maintaining eye contact. These ponies are peaceful, Henry. They haven't wandered from my land. They couldn't have caused damage to your property. Blackwell stepped even closer, jaw clenched tightly. I've had enough, Fletcher. If you won't remove them willingly, expect a visit from the authorities. I've already called them. A wave of cold dread rushed through Tom as he watched Blackwell turn sharply on his heel, storming back toward his car without another word. The engine roared again, and gravel scattered violently as the sedan sped away down the winding lane. Tom released a breath he'd been unconsciously holding, turning gently toward Heather and Moor. The ponies were tense, sensitive to the charged atmosphere left in Blackwell's wake. It's all right, Tom whispered soothingly, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. I won't let anything happen to either of you. I promise. But beneath his calm exterior, anxiety gnawed deeply at him. Blackwell was known for his influence and relentless determination. If he'd set his mind against them, trouble was sure to follow. Later that afternoon, Rachel arrived at the cottage, immediately sensing the heavy mood that clung stubbornly to the air. After Tom relayed Blackwell's threats, concern shadowed her usually calm expression. Henry Blackwell is powerful, she admitted reluctantly, worry evident in her voice. But he also jumps to conclusions quickly. Maybe I can speak to Constable Laura Hughes. She's fair, understands animals better than most. She might help diffuse this. Tom's brow furrowed deeply, a rare vulnerability flickering briefly through his gaze. Heather isn't ready to be moved yet. Her strength has improved, but she's still fragile. Any upheaval could set her recovery back. Rachel nodded, placing a comforting hand on Tom's shoulder. I know, Tom. I'll speak to Laura right away. She knows these ponies belong to no one. If we can make her understand they're harmless, she'll convince Henry to back off. As Rachel drove away, Tom spent the remainder of the day reinforcing fences around his land, checking and rechecking boundaries meticulously. Yet, as he worked, doubt lingered persistently in his thoughts. Could Heather and Moor have wandered unknowingly during the night? Had he overlooked something crucial? That evening, as darkness painted Exmoor in shadowy blues and grays, Tom sat beside Heather in her stable, gently brushing her coat, hoping the familiar action would calm them both. Moor stood watch just outside, her silhouette steady and comforting beneath the pale moonlight. I promised to keep you safe, Tom murmured quietly, his voice carrying softly through the quiet stable. And I'll do whatever it takes. Heather nudged her head gently against Tom's chest, her dark eyes wide and trusting. Tom felt a quiet resolve solidify within him, the kind of determination he'd long forgotten he possessed. His life had changed dramatically, the quiet solitude he'd sought now replaced by the fragile lives that trusted him deeply. Late that night, as he locked the stable securely, headlights sliced through the darkness once more, but this time gently, signaling Rachel's return. She stepped from her vehicle quickly, her expression grave yet hopeful. I spoke with Laura, Rachel said softly, urgency in her voice. She'll visit tomorrow morning. She promises to be fair. But Henry's already filing complaints. He's serious about this, Tom. Tom drew a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever lay ahead. Then we'll show Laura the truth, that these ponies are innocent, that they're safe here. Rachel smiled gently, admiration shining quietly in her eyes. They chose you wisely, Tom. Heather and Moor. They knew exactly where they belonged. As Rachel left once more, Tom turned toward the stable, looking silently toward Moor, who stood calmly watching him. He knew difficult days awaited, challenges posed by Blackwell's stubborn anger. Yet beneath that awareness lay quiet strength, born of trust, companionship, and responsibility. Together, he whispered quietly, making a silent vow beneath the vast Exmoor sky. Heather and Moor had offered him trust freely. Now it was his turn to protect them, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The next morning arrived not with sunshine, but with a thick blanket of fog that clung to the land like a warning. The air was heavy and damp, curling around the trees and draping across the moors, until everything beyond a few yards disappeared into white. Tom stood at the edge of his cottage yard, his breath forming little clouds in front of him, arms folded tightly across his chest as he waited. Inside the stable, Heather stirred restlessly. Though her condition had improved day by day, the tension from the previous day had clearly unsettled her. Moor lingered nearby, her tall figure barely visible through the mist, pacing slowly, ears flicking every time a twig snapped or a crow cawed in the distance. Tom's jaw clenched as he heard the familiar crunch of tires on gravel, more cautious this time than Blackwell's earlier arrival. A police SUV emerged slowly from the fog and came to a halt just beyond the gate. Constable Laura Hughes stepped out, dressed plainly in uniform, her face calm and unreadable, though her eyes quickly scanned the area with practiced care. She was in her 40s, steady and even-tempered, with a reputation in the area for being thoughtful and fair. Tom had only interacted with her a handful of times since moving to Exmoor, but he'd always respected the way she approached things. With reason first, not accusations. "Morning, Tom," she said with a nod, stepping forward. "Constable Hughes." He returned politely, then gestured toward the stable. "Heather's inside. She's doing better, but she's not ready to be moved. Not yet." Laura gave a short nod. "Rachel briefed me last night. Said you've been caring for a wild foal that wandered onto your property. Henry Blackwell also gave me a rather long, angry message." Tom exhaled sharply, choosing his words with care. "Blackwell's convinced these ponies are damaging his land, but I've kept Moor and Heather here, on my property. They haven't gone anywhere." Laura looked toward the stable thoughtfully. "May I take a look?" "Of course," Tom said, leading the way. As they stepped inside, the warm scent of hay, wood, and animal filled the air. Heather stood near the back of the stall, ears alert, her small frame tense at the sight of a stranger. But when Tom stepped beside her and placed a calming hand on her back, she relaxed slightly. "She came to me that night," Tom explained, voice low and steady. "Barely breathing, cold and starving. I called Rachel. We've done everything we can to bring her back. I built this stable for her. She's never crossed Blackwell's line. Not once." Laura knelt slowly, careful not to startle the foal. "And this one out there?" she asked, gesturing through the door toward Moor. "That's the mother?" "Yes. She's wild, like all Exmoor ponies, but she's stayed close, never threatened anyone. She watches from a distance, that's all." Heather shifted slightly, her legs strong enough now to walk short distances. Laura watched her, quiet for a moment, then stood. "She seems bonded to you," Laura said simply. She follows your voice, and I see no sign she's been mistreated or neglected. Quite the opposite. Before Tom could respond, a second car engine approached. Blackwell again. The black sedan sliced through the fog, pulling up sharply next to Laura's SUV. He got out briskly, walking fast, his expression coiled with impatience. "Ah, there you are," he snapped. "I hope you've seen enough. These ponies need to be removed before they destroy anything else. I want them off my land by week's end." Laura turned slowly to face him. "I haven't seen any evidence that these animals have been on your land, Mr. Blackwell." Blackwell scoffed. "They're wild, aren't they? Of course they've been wandering. You think Fletcher here has control over a wild pony and her foal?" "I think," Laura said evenly, "that Tom has been caring for an abandoned foal and has provided safe shelter. Moor, the adult, has not posed any threat. I have seen no proof that either have crossed your property line." Blackwell's face turned a deeper red. "That's absurd. I've got broken fences, missing sheep. What more do you need?" "Evidence," Laura said calmly. "Not assumptions." Blackwell took a furious step forward. "This is a waste of time. Those animals don't belong to anyone. If they're on his land, they're his responsibility, and his problem when they get someone hurt." "They're not a problem," Tom interjected, his voice suddenly sharper, firmer. "They've done nothing wrong, and I've taken full responsibility for their care. Heather's still recovering, and Moor hasn't left this area since the night she arrived. You're upset about your sheep, I get that, but these ponies aren't the cause." Laura stepped between the two men, raising a calming hand. "That's enough. Mr. Blackwell, unless you have proof these ponies caused damage, I won't be pursuing any action against Mr. Fletcher or the animals. If you do have proof, feel free to submit it formally." Blackwell stared at her, stunned into silence. Then, with a low growl of frustration, he turned and stomped back to his car. The door slammed, the engine revved, and moments later he was gone, vanished again into the fog. Laura turned back to Tom, her face relaxing a little. "You've got nothing to worry about, Tom. Keep caring for her, and if anyone gives you trouble, let me know." Tom nodded, the tension in his chest finally easing. "Thank you, Constable." She smiled faintly. "You're doing something good here. I can see it." Once she left, the silence returned. Moor wandered cautiously back into the yard, nuzzling the edge of the stable as if she'd sensed everything. Tom turned toward her and reached out gently, stroking the side of her neck. "I told you I wouldn't let anything happen," he murmured, "and I meant it." Inside, Heather watched the reunion quietly, her eyes wide, soft, aware. She stepped forward a few careful paces and nudged her head against Tom's arm, seeking contact. Tom froze, then smiled, a real, unguarded smile, as he turned toward her. "Looks like we're all in this together now, huh?" That night, as he tucked Heather in and checked on Moor once more before turning in, Tom felt something settle within him, like a knot slowly, finally loosening. He was no longer running, no longer hiding. He was exactly where he needed to be, with those who needed him just as much. And in the quiet fog, where once there had only been solitude and grief, there now lived a promise of protection, of redemption, and of unexpected family. The wind shifted across Exmoor as the days passed, carrying with it the changing scent of late summer, the sharpness of drying grass, the sweetness of distant heather blooming purple on the hills. The tension that had once thickened the air around Tom's cottage had finally lifted. Mr. Blackwell hadn't returned since Laura Hughes's visit, and though his silence was no guarantee of surrender, it gave Tom and the ponies the peace they needed. Heather had grown stronger by the day. She now stood tall and proud beside her mother, trotting confidently across the fenced pasture Tom had built for them both. Her once wobbly legs now moved with grace and certainty. Her coat had taken on a glossy sheen, and her eyes sparkled with curiosity and mischief. Tom watched her often from the porch, arms crossed over his chest, pride blooming quietly in his chest, like a long dormant flower reawakening. She was everything he hadn't known he needed. A reason to get up, to build, to care again. But along with that pride came a quiet ache, the knowledge that wild things weren't meant to be kept, no matter how deeply they were loved. Rachel arrived one afternoon with a solemn expression, her boots kicking up little puffs of dust as she walked toward the house. "She's almost ready," she said without preamble, her voice gentle but firm. Tom nodded slowly. "I figured. She's been sticking close to Moor lately. Fewer naps near the hearth. Less following me around like a lost puppy." Rachel gave a soft smile. "It's natural. Moor's been calling to her more often. Herd instincts are kicking in. The longer she stays, the harder it'll be when the time comes." They stood side by side in silence for a while, watching Heather chase a butterfly across the tall grass, while Moor looked on, ever the quiet protector. "You think she'll go?" Tom asked finally, barely above a whisper. "She might," Rachel said, "but you have to give her the choice." That night, Tom barely slept. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring out the window as the moon bathed the moors in silver light. He thought about all he'd lost before Exmoor, and everything he'd found since Heather had come into his life. The idea of losing her now twisted something deep in his chest, but holding her back, trapping her, felt like a betrayal of everything she was. At dawn, Tom opened the stable door. Heather lifted her head immediately, alert, sensing something different in the air. Tom didn't say anything at first. He simply walked into the pasture and opened the gate to the moors, letting the breeze drift in unimpeded. "Heather," he called softly, and she came to him like she always did, her hooves thudding lightly over the damp earth. He placed a hand on her neck, warm and strong. "You've got a choice now," he whispered. "I'm not going to keep you here if you're meant to be out there. Your mom's waiting. You're stronger now, braver too. It's your time." Moor stood further out, barely visible in the thinning mist, her body turned toward the open land. She didn't call, didn't move, just waited. Heather blinked up at Tom, as if searching his eyes for certainty. He smiled, though it was the hardest thing he'd done in years, and stepped aside. She hesitated, ears twitching, body turned halfway toward Moor. Then she stepped forward, slowly at first, then faster. Tom held his breath as she closed the distance between them. But then, halfway across the pasture, she paused. She turned, trotted back, and nudged her head against Tom's chest, nuzzling his shirt with her muzzle. He froze, overcome. Tears stung the back of his eyes as he wrapped his arms gently around her neck. "You're something else, you know that," he murmured. Heather pulled away softly, then turned again, this time without hesitation, galloping to Moor, who greeted her with a soft snort and a gentle nuzzle. Tom stood at the gate, watching them melt into the morning mist together, two shadows merging with the land that birthed them. He stayed there for a long time, long after the silhouettes disappeared over the hill. And though his chest ached with a hollow sort of silence, something else swelled in its place, a quiet pride. He had given her the chance to choose, and she had chosen wisely. She had chosen freedom. Tom returned to the cottage in a kind of haze. He cleaned Heather's stable slowly, methodically, folding the blankets she had slept on, brushing dust off the wooden slats he had built with his own hands. Every movement felt like closing a chapter, tender, reluctant, and full of meaning. Rachel returned that evening, finding Tom sitting on the porch, a cup of untouched tea in his hands. She didn't speak right away. She just sat beside him, looking out at the fading sun painting the moors in gold. "She left?" Rachel asked softly. "She did," Tom replied, "but not without saying goodbye." Rachel nodded, a quiet smile pulling at her lips. "She knew what you gave her. That matters." "She gave me something too," Tom said, his voice low. "She reminded me who I used to be, who I could be again." They sat together in silence as the sun dipped behind the hills. The moors stretched endlessly before them, wild and endless, full of life and memory. And somewhere out there, a young pony ran free, strong, wild, and forever changed by the man who had chosen to love her enough to let her go. The days after Heather left unfolded with a quiet gentleness that Tom hadn't expected. The absence of her small frame beside the hearth, the missing rhythm of her hooves across the yard, the silence that followed instead of her curious whinnies. At first, it all hit like a cold wind. But strangely, it didn't hollow him out the way he feared. Instead, it left room. Room to breathe, room to remember, room to feel again. Tom threw himself into his days, not out of avoidance, but because he finally had the energy to care. The fence that had needed mending for months was finally reinforced. The vegetable beds he'd neglected for nearly 2 seasons were cleared, replanted, and already showing promise. He even cleared out the spare room in the cottage, sorting through dusty boxes and letting in light that hadn't touched the floorboards in years. But the biggest change was inside him. The heaviness he'd carried when he first came to Exmoor, the grief, the guilt, the isolation, had softened. It hadn't disappeared, but it no longer defined him. He found himself rising earlier, walking farther, looking up more often. And when the wind came through the hills, he listened, not for danger, not out of dread, but simply to be a part of it. Moor returned once, about a week after Heather left. Tom saw her standing just beyond the far ridge at sunset, the fading light catching the outline of her muscular frame. She didn't approach the cottage, and Heather wasn't with her, but for a moment, they stood there, Tom and Moor, watching each other across the moorland, sharing a silent, enduring bond. Then, like smoke, she turned and disappeared again into the tall grass and mist. Rachel kept visiting, not out of obligation anymore, but because the rhythm of their connection had grown into something genuine. Some days she brought coffee and local gossip from the village. Other times she stayed late, helping Tom set up fencing or repaint the stable, both of them working side by side in companionable silence. Their conversations became deeper, more personal. And though neither said it out loud, something between them had changed, like a door slowly swinging open, creaking from years of stillness, but finally letting the light in. One warm afternoon, as they sat on the porch sipping lemonade, Rachel glanced toward the field where the stable stood. "You ever think about taking in another animal?" she asked. Tom considered the question for a long moment. "I'm not sure. Heather was something special. That wasn't just caring for a foal, that was healing, for both of us." Rachel smiled gently. "She was a gift." Tom nodded slowly. But maybe one day. I'd like to think this place can be a safe spot again. For something or someone. Rachel glanced sideways at him, a knowing smile playing at the edge of her lips. You've become a part of this land, you know. Not just someone who lives here. You belong here now. That thought settled deep in Tom's chest, warm and steady. Belonging was not something he'd felt in a long time. But here, among the fog and fields, the wind and wild ponies, the broken fences he'd repaired, and the stable he'd built by hand, it finally felt true. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with streaks of rose and copper, Tom stood at the edge of his property and looked across the hills. The moors stretched endlessly before him, soft and golden in the dying light. Somewhere out there, Heather was running wild and free, her legs strong and sure, her spirit unbroken. And he didn't feel the need to go after her. He didn't need to know where she was exactly. It was enough to know she was out there, living her life, carrying with her a piece of him and this land. Inside the cottage, the fireplace crackled gently as Tom placed a new photo frame on the mantel, a picture Rachel had taken just a few days before Heather left. In it, Tom stood beside the foal, one hand resting on her shoulder as she looked directly at the camera, ears forward, eyes bright. He was smiling, not forced or polite, but truly, deeply smiling. He studied the photo for a long time, then stepped back, satisfied. Later that night, a gentle knock came at the door. Tom opened it to find Laura Hughes standing there, holding a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "Found this at the station," she said. "Came through the post. No return address, but I figured it was for you." Tom took the package, puzzled, and thanked her. After she left, he opened it slowly, peeling back the layers until he uncovered a worn, leather-bound journal. Inside was a single folded note in neat handwriting. "Thought you might want to start writing things down again. The land remembers, but it helps when people do too. R." Tom smiled, closing the book gently and holding it in both hands. The weight of it felt good, honest. He sat down at the table, opened to the first page, and began to write, not just about Heather or the foal or the moor, but about himself, his journey, the pieces he had lost and found, the courage it took to start again. Outside, the wind danced across the land, carrying with it the soft echo of distant hooves and the wild call of Exmoor. Tom listened, then smiled to himself, the pen still moving, steady and sure. For the first time in a long time, peace had returned. Not because everything was perfect, not because the past had been forgotten, but because something had shifted, something real. And in that quiet truth, Tom found a life he hadn't even known he was missing. A life worth holding on to. A life worth living. Tom stood at the top of the ridge, just as the first light of morning cracked across the horizon. The moors stretched out before him like a living canvas, painted in shades of gold, green, and violet, where heather bloomed across the hillsides. The breeze was gentle but constant, carrying with it the distant call of skylarks and the faint rustle of wild ponies somewhere beyond sight. He could feel it in his bones now, that rhythm, that breath of the land. It had seeped into him slowly, quietly, until it became part of who he was. Heather stood beside him. It had been nearly 2 weeks since she reappeared, this time on her own, without Moor. She had wandered back into the pasture one foggy dawn, a little taller, a little stronger, her frame lean and weather-hardened. At first she kept her distance, watching him from across the fence, testing something unseen. Tom hadn't called to her, hadn't taken a step forward. He just stood there, the same way Moor used to, patient and steady. And then Heather came. She trotted toward him, ears flicking, eyes wide and cautious but without fear. She nudged his hand softly as if to say, "I remember." And in that moment, something in Tom's chest cracked open again, not from sadness but from the quiet realization that the connection hadn't been lost. It had only matured. She had gone and lived and learned, and now she had come back, not as the weak, trembling foal he once rescued, but as a creature fully her own. Now, as they stood together at the top of the ridge, Tom breathed deeply, his eyes scanning the moors. He had come to Exmoor to disappear, to fade into the folds of mist and silence, to run from the noise and pain that once consumed him. But Exmoor hadn't let him vanish. Instead, it had drawn him in with quiet urgency. It had put Heather in his path, then Moor, then Rachel, then a new version of himself he hadn't believed could exist. "This land," he murmured aloud, voice low and reflective. "It doesn't forget." Heather shifted beside him, brushing her side lightly against his hip before stepping forward, head high, gaze fixed on the open space ahead. There was a power in her now, one Tom hadn't seen before, not just in her muscles or her speed, but in the way she held herself. She was confident, whole. Rachel arrived later that afternoon, walking up the same hill, her boots leaving faint prints in the grass behind her. She carried a basket of warm bread and a small jar of wildflower honey, gifts from the village, though Tom suspected she brought them mostly because she knew he'd forget to eat. "She looks good," Rachel said with a nod toward Heather, who stood grazing nearby. "She's changed," Tom replied, then smiled. "We both have." Rachel turned to him, her eyes studying his face. "You're not the same man I met that night. The one who opened the door, scared out of his mind, acting like letting someone in was the worst thing that could happen." "I was scared," he admitted, no shame in the words. "But Heather reminded me that not all broken things are meant to stay broken. Some just need time, and someone to care." They sat together on the hill for a while, saying little, watching the shadows grow longer as the sun dipped lower. Birds darted overhead, ponies wandered lazily across the far ridge, and the breeze carried the familiar earthy scent of Exmoor's late summer air. "You ever think about leaving?" Rachel asked softly, her voice almost lost in the wind. Tom shook his head slowly. "Not anymore. I think I was always meant to be here. I just didn't know it." Rachel smiled, a slow, knowing smile. This place has a way of finding the ones who need it most. Tom turned to her, eyes filled with something deeper than just gratitude. "Do you ever wonder why Heather came to me?" Rachel paused, then answered. "Maybe she needed you, or maybe you needed her. Probably both." Tom looked down at the land that had become his sanctuary, his teacher, his home. "She showed me that healing isn't a straight path. Sometimes it's muddy and slow, full of detours. But it's possible. And it doesn't mean forgetting what you lost. It means learning to carry it differently." Rachel nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's the real lesson of Exmoor." Tom leaned back on his elbows, letting the wind ruffle his hair, letting the silence wrap around them like a blanket. Somewhere in the distance, a soft whinny echoed, and Heather raised her head in response, ears alert. "She'll go again," Rachel said, watching her. "One day." "I know," Tom replied, "and I'll let her." "But she'll come back," Rachel added, "because this is home now." He looked at her, at Heather, at the hills that rolled endlessly into the horizon. and he knew she was right. This wasn't just land. It wasn't just a cottage or a stable or a routine. It was a place of return, a place where lost things found themselves again, where silence was never truly empty, and where bonds, once formed, were never really broken. Tom stood, brushing off the grass from his jeans. He extended a hand to Rachel, pulling her to her feet. "Come on," he said with a grin. "Let's walk a little further." They wandered down the hill, side by side, past where heather grazed, past the tall heather blooms swaying gently in the breeze. As they walked, the sun slipped lower, painting the moors in amber and lavender. Tom looked around one last time before the light disappeared completely, etching the scene into his memory. And as darkness gently settled over Exmoor, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not just peace, not just belonging, but purpose. The kind that doesn't demand grand gestures or perfect answers. The kind that quietly reminds you, you're where you're meant to be, and that was enough. Evening came quietly over Exmoor, soft and deliberate, like it had all the time in the world. The sky stretched wide and pale above the rolling hills, streaked with faded orange and dusky purple. Down below, Tom moved through the pasture with a bucket of oats in one hand and a slow, steady step that had become second nature. The air smelled faintly of wild thyme, and a pair of robins darted past his shoulder, their wings beating quick against the hush of twilight. Heather hadn't been back in days, and still, every morning and every evening, Tom left the gate open, just in case. He didn't wait the way he used to, not with the same ache, the same worry, the same holding of breath, but a part of him, deeper than hope and quieter than longing, always listened for the sound of hooves in the distance. It wasn't about needing her back. It was about knowing she could return if she wanted to. That freedom wasn't the end of love. It was the proof of it. He finished scattering the oats near the trough and stood upright, stretching his back with a quiet groan. A soft wind swept across the field, lifting the edge of his flannel shirt and carrying the cool scent of mist and damp soil. He turned toward the ridge, just as the last light was beginning to dip, and saw something that made his breath catch. Not panic, not surprise, just quiet recognition. There she was, Heather. She stood tall now, leaner than she had been, her coat glossy in the fading sun. She was no longer the foal who'd trembled in his arms near the fire. She was full-grown, her gaze sharp and steady. And behind her, partially hidden by the grass and slope, was a younger foal, smaller, darker, with knobby legs and wide, curious eyes. Tom felt something swell in his chest, a pressure behind his eyes that he didn't bother hiding. Heather trotted forward, closing the distance with quiet confidence. The smaller foal followed hesitantly, sticking close to her side. She stopped just a few feet from him and let out a soft, familiar snort, like a greeting, like an echo of the past. "You found your way back," Tom said softly, his voice rough at the edges, "and brought company." He didn't step forward. He just stood still, open, the same way he had that very first night she returned after choosing freedom. Heather moved closer, nudged her head gently against his arm, then turned to glance at the foal. The little one stepped cautiously forward, staring up at Tom with wide, uncertain eyes. Tom crouched slowly and extended his hand. The foal took another step, then another, before pressing its soft nose into his palm. He smiled. "I guess it's my turn again, huh?" That night, Tom sat on the porch with the stars spread out above him like scattered salt. Rachel sat beside him, a mug of tea in her hands. her knee touching his, warm and steady. "She trusts you," Rachel said quietly. "Enough to bring her baby here." Tom looked out into the pasture, where Heather and her foal had settled near the old stable, content beneath the moonlight. "I guess I did something right." Rachel turned toward him, her eyes soft and searching. "You did more than that. You opened yourself up when it was the hardest thing to do. You let her go, and she came back. That's not luck. That's love." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he leaned back, feeling the chair creak beneath him, letting the cool air settle on his skin. Everything in him felt still, but not empty. Full, but not crowded. Peaceful. "I used to think running away was the only way I could survive," he said finally. "After everything that happened with the rescue team, after losing people I couldn't save, I thought disappearing would make the guilt stop. But Exmoor, this land, those ponies, even you all showed me something different." Rachel waited, letting the silence do what it did best. "I thought healing meant forgetting," Tom continued. "But it doesn't. It means remembering, but not letting it define you. It means building something new with the parts that are still standing." Rachel reached over and gently took his hand. He didn't flinch or pull away. "They say this land remembers," she said. "Maybe that's true. But I think it also forgives. It gives second chances. Quietly, without fanfare, just like Heather did." Tom looked up at the stars, his voice low. "I don't think I would have survived without her." Rachel squeezed his hand. "Maybe she wouldn't have survived without you." A few days later, Tom took Heather and her foal to the top of the same ridge where they'd once stood together. The wind was strong that morning, carrying the scent of coming rain and distant sea salt. The three of them stood side by side, man, mare, and foal, watching the hills below breathe in long, sweeping movements. Tom bent down and whispered something into the foal's ear, a quiet promise. Then he straightened, opened the pasture gate again, and stepped back. Heather hesitated, just for a second. Then she turned, gave him one last look, and galloped forward, her foal close behind. They disappeared into the mist, swallowed up by the land that had raised them. Tom stood there a while longer, the wind tugging gently at his coat. Then he smiled. They would return, or maybe they wouldn't. But either way, they would carry him with them, just as he would carry them. Exmoor wasn't just a place. It wasn't just fog and wild ponies and old wooden fences. It was a mirror, a guide, a reminder that sometimes the things we're running from are the very things we're meant to face, that healing takes time, silence, and patience, that love is letting go and trusting it might return, and that even the loneliest heart can find peace, if it dares to open again. As he walked back to the cottage, the wind whispered across the hills, "Welcome home."